Great. So for those of you logging on, we're going to give it about a minute or so to let everybody get in, and then Jason and I will kick this off. All right. A few more seconds and we will get started. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Samantha Lake. I am the COO of ProNovos. Prior to my time at ProNovos, I was with the Construction Financial Management Association, where I had the pleasure of meeting Jason Keene. And so, we both kind of bonded over our mutual love of technology, and we often would find ourselves talking about it. So I jumped at the opportunity to be able to do a webinar with Jason on that very topic. So Jason, I'm going to turn it over to you, let you do a little introduction, and then we can jump into this.
Thanks, Sam. So I'm Jason Keene. I am the CFO and COO of Mills in Nebraska. Been in the construction industry my entire career. Like Sam said, started out sort of in the technology realm, moved over into the accounting side of it. Now I'm also touching and working with the operations side of the business. So I've really, through my entire career, watched how technology can impact construction companies. So I'm really excited to dive deep today.
Thanks, Jason. So before we started, we have a little poll for everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll. The poll is, well, nope, sorry. John messed with me here. We have I guess, a first one. We're jumping the gun here. It's a demo request. So if you're not a ProNovos client, I highly encourage you to check out our product with your actual data inside of it. But I'm going to end this for now. Our actual poll that I wanted to launch before we get in is, how technologically advanced is your company? So we are rating this on a scale of 1 through 5. 1 being you are still a pen and paper type company. And then 5 is you guys are on the technological forefront of the construction space. So just give us an idea of where your company currently stands in regards to technology. So I'm happy to see nobody is in the pen and paper era. So looking at where we're at, it's looking like, people are kind of in that middle ground, Jason. They're not on the technology forefront, but they're also not, working on pen and paper. So I think that that's a good sign that we have some attendees who are going down the right track in regards to technology.
I agree. I think this will be a fun conversation for the group of how to really think about it in a strategic way. So,
Agreed. All right. So with technology, oftentimes what we're hearing from people is, they can't afford the latest technology. And in 2023, we're actually at a place where you can't afford not to have it. So Jason, when thinking about that, why do you think this is so true in 2023?
well, historically, the construction industry has been known as a lagging industry on the technology front, but that means it's ripe for upheaval. So if you think through some of the other industries that have gone through dramatic change in the last few years, let's think about CDs. Let's think about the movie industry. Let's think about all the things Apple has uprooted by their technological infrastructure. Let's think about how Google searching has changed the way that people interact. All these industries are getting changed and very rapidly, and it's catching people off guard that used to make the CDs and things like that. And in the construction industry, that's becoming the case too. There's more and more technology driving different aspects of the business. And so it's really become paramount that we're thinking strategically about what that means.
You know, if you look at the last JB Knowledge report that was out there in 2021, they found that 53.7% of construction companies reported having a process for testing and implementing new technologies. So this is a great case that you got to keep up with your competition. So over half of construction companies now have integrated this into their business model. So if your company isn't doing that, now you're one step behind and you're not going to be as effective and efficient as what these other companies are going to be. And there's a few things we'll touch on in this presentation that will give you an idea of why this is so important. So, I mean, jumping into it, let's kind of look at why technology matters, especially in an industry that, has been known for kind of being manpower and muscle. So if we break down the first three, let's look from an operational perspective. Just being able to be innovative. So that is going to help you solve some of your workflow issues. It's going to increase efficiency and productivity. It's going to improve your culture if you do it right. So that's the caveat with technology is if you roll out the technology right, it improves culture. If you do not roll out technology correctly, it's going to have the opposite effect on your organizational culture. So it's just going to allow you to be more flexible and more nimble. And in this digital age, technology is evolving all of the time. So you need to put your company in a position from a technological perspective where you can adapt quickly and stay up with what the competition's doing. Additionally, we've all been hearing about the skill shortage. When CFMA would do their Competency report, outside of one report that I was a part of in 4 years, the number one issue was the skill shortage. So if you're looking to attract and retain talent within this industry, there's an expectation with this next generation that are digital natives in regards to things being technologically savvy. So there's some things that you're never going to get around that's going to, be physical manual labor, but there's other things like the way in which they're doing their reports, the way in which they're engaging with the technology to get the accounting department the information they need. There's this expectation that it's going to be easy to do. There's not going to be duplicative data entry processes, and it's going to be seamless. And that's going to help you also attract and employ stronger talent and bringing them into the organization. So that's kind of a high level from an operational perspective of why it's important. But Jason, can you speak to the on-the-job perspective that you're seeing within construction companies of why it's important?
For sure. And if you take the concept of just overarching need for technology and how it can impact, just think about the day-to-day of business. And you're looking here in the slide, you're saying cost management. Technology cost. How are we managing cost of technology? Well, the right technology empowers your users to be able to quickly and efficiently manage what they're looking at. Let me give an example there. So if you think about the AP process, historically, that was a piece of paper, or you'd email somebody an AP invoice for them to approve. Well, there's now system and technology out there that allows you to scan it. It uses OCR, or optical character recognition, to then scan the information off of it, partially populate the invoice in the system, automatically route it out for approval, and automate that process so that your user in the field who's busy, your superintendents never want to do anything quickly because they're trying to get out there and do things in the field. They don't really want to focus on the system side, but if you can put the power in their hand to review and approve an invoice in the moment or a time card, that's super powerful. In the same light, what you said, Sam, around error reduction, just from a day-to-day standpoint, we've all historically relied on spreadsheets dramatically to run our businesses. And a spreadsheet is not a database. A spreadsheet is an analytics tool. And in using spreadsheets and entering data multiple times, there's risk of bad data or messing something up. Then you're not looking at the truth and your decisioning power, which is really what a lot of this is about, is giving people what they need quickly to make the decisions they need, which leads sort of that last point of nimbleness. You've really got to have the right tools that make the day-to-day and reduces the friction points. There's a phrase that says, what's the one thing that you can do that will make everything else simple or irrelevant? And the right technology can make tasks simpler or irrelevant because you automate part of it. So that's really where it can be powerful.
Very well said. And I'm going to put you on the spot here, Jason. Do you have any instances in your experience or your career where there was that frustration and friction between, we'll call it the office and the field staff because of some of these issues with technology?
For sure. I don't think there'll be anybody who's been in construction who hasn't faced that because most on the ground operation employees really aren't super excited about the new tech that they have to interact with. Again, they want to be out there building the work. And so if it's not rolled out in a wise way, or it really does increase the burden to that employee in order to what they capture and they don't get anything in return, then there's going to be resistance and it's going to be feeling like something that just the ivory tower back in the office wants in order to watch over them and see what's going on. So really helping understand the why behind it, understanding why we might be asking for more information or more timely information, how you'll produce reporting to empower them to do it. That's where it matters. And I've definitely had instances, most of my career was spent in the heavy civil industry. So either putting a road in, a bridge, or moving dirt. And again, those ladies and gentlemen out there that are really doing the day to day of that labor have put in 12-hour days out in the heat. I live in Florida, so it's really out in the heat. And they're less than excited to interact with technology at the end of the day to put in their time card. But if I can turn around something so that they know how they're producing, how their company is doing on a daily basis, if they're hitting target, if they're heading toward their objectives, then there's an end and a goal in mind, and the why comes around for them to have a decisioning tool to understand when they're being effective and not.
Great, thank you. So before we move on to our next point, we have another poll. This is what Jason and I are just kind of curious in regards to like the technology roadmap of those of you viewing this today. So we have two questions here. First one is, do you know what a technology roadmap is or a technology strategic plan? And then the second question is, if so, does your company currently have one in place? So Jason, I'm seeing some good early results. Over half of our participants today do know what a technology roadmap is. And 33% have something in place. 22% have something in place, but it's just not formal. And then we have 44% that need to have one implemented and put into place. So hopefully today we'll be able to give you the highest level of this. And then if you have some questions or, need some additional information, feel free to reach out. Um, but are you surprised by seeing any of these results, Jason?
I'm not. I really think that we as a construction industry are becoming more sophisticated. So I think this is indication of that. Like you
Mhm.
said, I hope that some of the tips and tricks we give can maybe help people refine what they have or challenge them to go to the next level with it.
So let's talk about some key technological trends and solutions for modernization. So, Jason, what are some of the observations that you have in regards to trends that you're seeing in the construction industry?
Lots of the trends are around information digitization in some shape, form, or fashion, and automation of process, and adding smart tech into the mix to
Mhm.
either give a piece of information that wasn't there before or to add something new that has been there, but just making it more efficient.
Mhm. And I mean, we're starting to see some big trends. Again, going back to that JB Knowledge study, 37% of construction companies in 2021 were starting to experiment with drones, which I know that you're going to speak to how that technology can be incorporated in. 90% of technology workers were using smartphones, and 82.8% use their laptop on a daily basis. And then, interestingly enough, 12.4% of respondents started using their smartwatches for work. So there's a whole nother level of tech of making it, really easy with their smartwatch to do their jobs. And then we're starting to see that 28.8% of construction firms are having dedicated BIM departments to use that building information modeling software. And then they didn't have an internal department. 35% of those companies that took part in this survey are outsourcing that. So I think it's really interesting, that was 2 years ago with this data, to see the trends and where people were starting to say, like, okay, so we need to figure out how can we leverage things like mobile devices, laptops, and smartphones for that very point that you made earlier to make the lives of our field workers easier. So I think it's really encouraging that people are starting to think differently about alleviating those pain points for those people who are, really without them, the construction industry doesn't exist. So let's talk about some of these different tech trends. I'm going to jump into AI. We are seeing AI in a variety of ways. I mean, for me, with what ProNovos does with financial analytics, I think I'm most excited to see how we're starting to use AI to analyze and assess our data. So, AI is really starting to become like a data scientist or a data analyst. And so you're seeing more and more technology, and it's on Pronovos's roadmap that we're going to start incorporating more AI into our technology as well, but leveraging the power of AI so that you can ask questions of your data set, which you would typically have to go to, your data analyst or your data specialist, and they would have to do complex, queries and run formulas in order to get those answers for you. And now we're seeing this being intuitively built directly into softwares. Jason, you and I talked about, improving order processing. I think you had a really great example when we were chatting about how AI is improving order processing. Do you want to touch on that?
Sure. I mean, there's now technologies being built into some of the accounting systems to where scanning AP and OCR was sort of the thing. Now AI is starting to learn and help do some of the basic accounting for you. So that's really been a place that is starting to leverage off of and build. I think another cool tool that I've been playing around with a little bit, and it's still in its early stages, but it's super powerful, is the ability to do takeoffs using AI, where it's reading the plans and it's telling you, in my case, because I'm with a door company, how many openings there are on the plans. And it's just giving you information that historically somebody would have to go through and count or use a on-screen takeoff or something like that for. And it is 99.5% accurate with what it's doing in a takeoff standpoint. So there's so many places that AI is stepping in and improving or automating what a human took hours and hours to do and maybe made errors along the way with.
Which, when we were figuring out what the trends were in the world of construction technology, you talked about the virtual reality and the augmented reality. And I think this is some of the coolest technology out there. I mean, I have an Oculus, so I'm familiar with this from a gaming standpoint. But can you talk about how the construction industry is leveraging AR and VR in the industry?
Yeah, there is some really interesting stuff going on here. So I think the first use case is just training. So you think about bringing somebody new into the asphalt or into the bridge industry and putting them behind a piece of heavy equipment that they may have never operated before, and them getting their hours of learning how to use it in a real machine where they can break it or hurt someone. So one of the pieces I'm hearing about and seeing is using AR, VR headsets and those type things in order to do virtualized training. Train somebody on how to use a loader, train somebody on how to use a crane in a virtual environment where it creates that same feel and interaction before they go out in the world. Get them some hours and some time behind it. Another aspect is really just looking at safety training overall and being able to take some of those potential safety instances and bring it to real life through a headset. That's really the training aspect. I think another really interesting one is in the AR or augmented reality. If you think about going out into the field of a GC and you've got these BIM models built in, you've got other tools coming in telling you where there's issues and where there's things that need to happen. Right now, that's sitting on a tablet in front of you. But in bringing an augmented reality headset into place to where as you're walking around the building is geotagged and it is telling you as you're looking at it, this is where the issue is, this is what the issue is, here's the notes about it, and bringing another layer into what you're looking at. Another one that is sort of, and I think this is really only happening on larger projects today, but at some point I think it will scale, is taking that augmented reality, or actually really the virtual reality headsets, and taking a BIM model and really putting skin on it, putting that finishing touch on it from a modeling standpoint so that you can walk the customer through their finished good before you produce it. That way, I think about it from like a home buyer's perspective. If you go to a showroom and you see all the different finishes and you have to sort of picture in your mind or on a screen what they would look like. Well, for large projects, you can now actually walk the project and see it in a virtual reality concept. So I think that will scale down over time and bring more and more into it. So there's just so many opportunities of how the specific tech can teach us, help us visualize things, create interaction in the field. I don't think it's there yet, but I think eventually the augmented reality could really play into even a loader operator or something like that, being able to see the grade they're supposed to cut and it being visually there for them. I know in my last company, there was some automation around that to where some of it was done by the machine. So if you layer an AR function and on top of that, it just continues to provide accuracy and information to the end user to do their job better.
That's fascinating. And going back to, previously when we talked about, employee acquisition, I mean, we talk about this next generation being digital natives and really into video games. And this could be a really great way to show that your company is modern and start attracting some of that younger talent who's really into video games. I mean, the military is doing it with their use of drones. And so, again, the construction industry, I think, can take away some of these key lessons on finding ways to modernize their companies to attract new talent.
And I think in the same light, Sam, you look at it and you say, well, you put somebody in front of the screen, it's not the same as being out there in the field on the piece of equipment. True. But I think about some even the modern movies where there's video games from a race car standpoint, and that person went from driving a video game and knew the thing so well that they were able to train and become a true race car driver. It's not that dissimilar if you're giving somebody the look and the feel of what they're going to interact with, so that when they get in the field, they already understand how it all fits together.
Good point. So like moving on to, kind of more simplistic tech, but still important nonetheless, is the use of barcodes and RFID. And I was on a job site tour 2 years ago, and the CFO that I was out there with was telling me how they're using barcodes and RFID to tag their tools. They were having a lot of issues with tools just randomly disappearing and walking off. And so they invested into, barcodes for like the lower inventory tools and RFID for like, the bigger pieces of equipment so they could track it down. I know the geolocation of things. But they said the cost savings just by simply putting that on there and the workers knowing now there's an accountability because if you lose something, we know you were the last person who had it based on the scan, or if something goes missing, that was yours. At least now we can leverage, geo tracking to try to like pinpoint the location. So I think it was all really interesting. But Jason, you had a few more examples too in regards to manufacturing and turn time on trucking too that was implementing this technology. Could you share those?
Sure. Back in the days when I worked with an asphalt contractor, moving that hot mix asphalt from the plant to the job site in an efficient manner and getting as many terms as you could with the material was super important. So there was a company who had come up with a methodology of using RFID tags and the scanners, both to track when the piece of equipment arrived at the job site, when it actually dumped the material into the spreader for the asphalt. It just helped get efficiencies. Now, are there different technologies like GPS and camera systems that do that now? Yes, but RFID is still being used in a tracking methodology. In the manufacturing aspect, it's ubiquitous. You're tracking your materials and your SKUs and where they are, where they live, when they leave. It's become just the standard from a true manufacturing standpoint. But there's always ways to think about tech that's been around a while. Barcodes and RFID is nothing new. But your example of the tools is somebody taking a somewhat historical technology and leveraging it in a cost-effective way to control something that, yeah, was there probably a cooler, more modern way to do it? Maybe, but that was effective and it got the job done.
Exactly. So speaking of like the cooler tech though, let's talk about drones. I mean, we're seeing a lot of this in regards to, taking pictures. And you'd given the great example of like, it's good for site progress, tracking, and like for your social media, which ultimately will help your construction company's marketing efforts. But you have a great example too about the accurate and efficient inventory calculation management with drones, which I had never heard of. So could you talk about that a little bit?
Again, this is specific to the asphalt and rock industry. When you go out to a plant, there'd be this giant pile of material. And historically, the way to take that off was to do the mathematical calculations of the volume of it, somewhat by hand, pile by pile. Not super accurate, lots of errors. And so the technology that came in there is you could fly over with drones and get a volumetric on it using the scanning technology of the size of the pile and all the volumes and things that go into that, and would be able to come up with a fairly accurate inventory calculation on a regular basis just by flying the drones around the site, letting it capture the numbers, crunch it, and spit it back out with the amount of rock or material you had on the ground. That was an area where I really saw it used in a very unique way in that period. And most that I know of asphalt and concrete companies use that type of function now. It's become sort of the industry standard in the way that you measure your inventory quantities.
So I'm going to move us along to probably my favorite use of technology. So it's not a surprise that I work for ProNovos. It's the use of data analytics. And, I think one of my favorite parts about this company is what we are doing from an efficiency and accessibility standpoint. And so, if we have any customers on here, they're very familiar with how we're making data accessible to everybody. And so, what we're seeing now, whether it's our solution or some of the other solutions out on the market, is the ability to take large complex data sets and apply automated workflows to take those data sets and put them in uh, easy to understand visualizations, reports, and graphics. And then what that's allowing to do is, especially with those non-construction financial professionals, they're able to understand exactly what they're looking at. And now it empowers them instead of being reactive when, the accounting team comes to them saying like, hey, what's going on with your billings, they can now be proactive because they see it in a way that makes sense to them outside of seeing it in the ERP and having to export it into Excel sheets. And then they're just like looking at straight data. So I'm really excited to see how technology now is just making it easier for everybody to understand where their projects are from a financial perspective and just having access to real-time data. There was one of the prospects we were on a call with, and I love how she positioned this. She said, I am pulling stuff from our ERP. I'm putting it into Excel sheets. I have several complex data sets I'm trying to compile. Meanwhile, I'm emailing project managers, trying to get them to give me their information. And by the time I get my report done, she's like, it's already outdated. She's like, so I'm not a construction professional. She's like, I'm a historian because I'm documenting what's already happened as opposed to being able to do my job and give people real-time information so they can course correct and, make decisions that are going to help their project forward. And so for me, I think that this is just super exciting to see how we're essentially making data accessible to everybody in ways that make sense to them. But I know, Jason, you have some great examples too about that accessibility and the decision making that you're seeing firsthand when this all kind of comes together in this harmonious way with technology.
The point you make there is so crucial, Sam, that it really is technology for technology's sake is not useful. Technology to make the business better is. And what that comes down to is using the technology to enable better decisions. You think about the tech we talked about earlier, it's more efficient information capturing your volumes of your rocks. It's AI helping you analyze things quicker. A really simple example of data analytics done well would be daily time capture. So what do I mean by that? If you think about the concept of you really want to capture data from the field on a daily basis, the field may say, why? Well, why would be this? If you're thinking of an asphalt contractor, they really know when they're estimating a job for things. They know what their labor is going to cost per ton. They know what their material is going to cost per ton. They know what their equipment is going to run and what it's going to cost per ton and what their haul is per ton. And so when they built that estimate, they built it assuming they were going to get a certain production rate. Well, if you turn around daily time capture and have a reporting tool in place that empowers that, then what you can do is on a daily basis, turn back around to the field and to the leadership of the company, what you're actually producing across those four things, because you're getting daily labor and equipment for, and even potentially material and haul from your labor reporting. And those four things tell you how you're doing. Are you ahead or behind of how you estimate? Do you need to adjust the way you estimate because you're producing at a different rate than you thought you would with the talent you have? Or do you need to pick it up in the field in order to make sure you get ahead of it and meet production? That's just one small example of how an end-to-end solution of using technology to drive analytics and decision making can happen. But as we get deeper into this concept of technology roadmap, really thinking about the end business piece of it and how it's going to inform and improve the business is crucial. So that's just one example, but there's tons and tons of examples. That's why there's so many dashboarding tools and analytic tools out there, and how ProNovos is stepping into that as well, just to create the power of the end information. We are now at a point where there's so much data from Internet of Things, from your systems, from online, that it could be a data overwhelm unless you're aggregating it in a smart way to drive decision.
Well said. Well, speaking of that roadmap, I mean, that's a great tie-in to, initiating strategic thinking about your technology modernization. So I think that the first part of this is how do you do it is you need to figure out where do you want to go. And there's two schools of thought that you could take with this. You could think about, all right, where do I want to go, or where should I look for efficiencies within the business? Because technology is not just about solving pain points, right? Technology is also about being truly innovative and thinking, where does the business need to go, and you might not have the pain points now, but anticipating those pain points and staying one step ahead of everybody else and being that visionary who says, like, okay, this is where I need the company to go. Or to the point that I made earlier, these are the issues we're having. So before I can even be a visionary, I got to solve some of these core issues within the organization. So how are you seeing this play out within companies, Jason?
I love how you say it. There's a phrase Wayne Gretzky said where he says, "You've got to skate to where the puck is going, not where it is." So that whole concept of looking ahead and thinking strategically about where your business is, what are the pain points in your business? So what are the things that if you could redo the systems and things you have in place today, you'd want to change? That's the first piece of really determining where the issues are, is understanding where it hurts and how it could be better. You know what those are. You hear it every day from your employees. And then it's looking at that and saying, how do you make it better? I'm going to go back to that simple concept of the labor. Historically, you'd be bringing it in on paper. Maybe you're getting your labor reporting once a week. You're really, like you said, looking in the rearview mirror of what's happening instead of saying, how do we drive for a daily change? How do we look at the pain point to know what we're producing so we can be more efficient at what we do to drive and make money? That's just one example of looking at a pain point. Now, I know you're going to go a bit more into the bigger picture of roadmap, but what that informs you is, do I have the right systems to drive that? How do I think about the right systems and how they fit together? And there's a lot of different pieces, like we talked about, from AR and VR, or AI and VR and all those things. Those are all great. But if you have the right core systems and processes in place to support them, it won't matter.
You're so spot on. And so before I get to this, I guess, so what I'm going to show you is a technology roadmap of where it stood when I was with CFMA, and then what we decided to do after doing our tech assessment. So looking at those core systems. So what your technology roadmap is ultimately going to do is it's going to guide your technology investments, and you're going to be able to be smarter with your budgets because you're going to be thinking ahead. So you're not looking at things in silos, which I often find in technology, right? People problem solution and I plug it in. Problem solution, I plug it in. Whereas if you had a tech roadmap, and let's say instead of spending 6 weeks deciding on a technology, you spend a year working on your roadmap, thinking big picture. You're now going to say, you know what, we could do this easier because there are some synergies with these integrations we need to make. So we could do this at one time. Okay, so then we do this in phase one. Now, phase two, we need to have this up and running and tested. So phase two is when we incorporate this. And it goes back to the cultural element too, Jason, that you mentioned, and not overwhelming your people and throwing too much tech at them at one time. Because right now, most of you are dealing with multiple generations within your workforce. You have, I call them the digital natives and the non-digital natives, right? And I don't want to put an age on this, but it's just those in your company that are really comfortable with technology and those in your company that are not comfortable with technology. So thinking strategically about how you're going to bring about new technologies, the phases and the stages in which you're going to release those, it's gonna help you so much in the long run, and it's also going to probably impact your budget as well as the timeline if you do this the right way. So when I came into my role as the VP of technology, this is what the tech stack looked like. And so at the center was the database. And so over the years, there were new systems added and things were constantly being added. Now, if you notice, these arrows only go one way. So the first pain point that I noticed from the staff was that we couldn't write back into our database. So what did that do? Probably likely what's happening with a lot of you is we had these data silos all over the place. So then what we'd have to do is we'd have to go into each system, export the data, put it into Excel with multiple data sets, and hope that we got it right when we were running our formulas on that to get the right data output. It was so costly and so time consuming, and it was oftentimes inaccurate or it was already outdated. So it was a very similar pain point to what we're seeing in the construction space. So, knowing all of this, I sat down with key stakeholders throughout the entire organization and I asked them, what are your pain points? What do you wish this could do? And so they told me what they were frustrated with. Then I was able to get that forward thinking and saying, what do you wish this could do? So we started assessing and we started figuring out that the first problem we had to solve for was we needed a database that was nimble enough that we could, as we grew, plug in other technologies and then make sure that we had two-way communication where it was not just authenticating, but it was writing back into that user record. So through all those conversations, we went from a hub and spoke model to an inverted triangle. So there were three main systems we had. We had a Salesforce type platform sitting as the database. We had a new LMS, and then we had the certification module with a new accounting system sitting in the middle. And then we still knew that we needed these external systems, but we wanted to make sure that they all tied back in. And you can see the arrows of the two-way communications, right? So we just weren't authenticating. We were able to track all of that user data back into the software. And that's how we were able to figure out from here, then we created our timeline, we created our budget, we created our roadmap for how this was all going to be rolled out. And that's how we developed the new tech stack that we had come up with. So Jason, do you have any comments on this approach or any tips to anybody out there who is going through this right now or thinking about going through this?
No, I think this is a wonderful example of thinking big picture and strategically of how it fits into the business and thinking about how you want your data to flow. Like you said, you could buy a bunch of systems, put them out there and do things with them, and they may be best in class systems, but if they're not interlinking and connecting and you're thoughtfully thinking about what's going to live where, you're going to end up with a mess. And so being strategic in where you start and the phasing of what you put in order to build from the ground up, just like a construction job. You're not going to build the top of the tower before you put in the foundation. You've got to put the foundation in and layer in the pieces of the puzzle, the pieces of the house as you go.
Wonderfully said. So now, just out of curiosity, we're curious for those of you that are thinking about investing in technology. What's the next big technology initiative that your company is looking at? So, are you looking at accounting software, project management, new CRM tools, anything for takeoff and estimating, BMI, document management, construction progress technology tracking? What else do we have here? Construction equipment and fleet management technology, build management technology, or design and modeling technology. And you can select as many that apply to what you are thinking. So I'm seeing a big trend amongst this group with accounting. And then we have a handful of people looking at a variety of other softwares. But accounting is the number one. And Jason, as we wait for this, you are currently going through an accounting tech initiative, right?
Yes, my current company is on a 20-year-old ERP, and so we're in the place of not just accounting, but operations, construction. It's all those pieces. Again, we looked and said what fits the best puzzle the best, and found something that fits all those for our industry specifically. So accounting is a super important one and a super painful one to do because it drives the underlying financials of the business.
So, all right, so we're to an end here. We really wanted to reiterate a few things for all of you. We know this can be super overwhelming. So know that we don't expect any of you to do this overnight. So we have a few pieces of advice for you all to kind of walk away with, and then we have a couple of minutes in case anybody has any questions for Jason and I. But I think Jason, the first thing for you was to be curious. So what do you mean when you want to give the advice to everybody to be curious?
It gets back to knowing the pain points. Be curious about your business. Ask the questions that you've always just assumed is how you have to do business, and say, if I could do this different, what would it look like and how would I do it? By being curious, you're going to identify the biggest pain points in your business that you can layer in and tackle.
I mean, after you have kind of started asking those questions and talking to people because you are curious, you're going to start identifying inefficiencies. And so, again, Jason made a point earlier about the field people and showing them like this isn't just another thing that the ivory tower is passing down for you to do on the field. If you show them how it's going to make their jobs faster, better, easier by solving those inefficiencies, it's going to go a long way to get buy-in. And I highly encourage you all to have some sort of a task group or create an ERP for tech innovation and make sure you're involving people from all throughout the company. So you're not just solving the problems the office is having. Because a lot of times I find that obviously those in the office, because this is their role, they're making decisions in their own sphere of influence and they don't include other people. So then it's this top down initiative, and you have the people who have to use the technology saying, I was never consulted on this. You guys got it wrong because you're not the ones on the field day in and day out doing our jobs. So I think it's really important that when you're identifying those inefficiencies, talk to people outside of the office. And then, Jason, how can they align it with their strategy? But well, let's talk about the strategy. What strategy are they aligning their tech plan with?
The global business strategy, just like you're putting together a business plan for how you want to grow your business. If you're not thinking about how technology is going to empower and drive that, if that's not part of the boardroom conversation, you're missing a key piece of the puzzle. I guarantee you there's no Fortune 500 company that isn't talking about how technology is going to impact the strategy of their business. So we have to as well. You have to be thinking as you're identifying weak points and issues of how you're going to use the tech to make you a more profitable and better company.
Unfortunately, a lot of this technology is falling to that construction financial professional. We're seeing a lot of CFOs taking over IT. And so, if this is an area where you don't feel particularly strong, don't underestimate the value of hiring a consultant. Just make sure you do your due diligence and make sure you're going to have a consultant that's truly going to understand your business. And they're not going to just create this boilerplate template for your tech stack. So, think about where you want to go. If you have the core competencies within your team to develop this, and if not, work it into your budget to hire a consultant to make sure that you do this right. Because the last part is creating the plan. So after you gather all of this data and all this information, you kind of have to be the mad scientist like I did. And I did so many pen and paper sketches to try to figure out every single database we had, every single piece of data, how did it all need to flow? And then we went through each one of the business units and we did BRDs, which are business requirements documents for every single thing that need to be encompassed. I mean, we ended up with like 100 pages of documentation for every single data point and how they all needed to flow together. So that plan you create, just like a plan that you would create for a construction project, is absolutely vital to the success of your tech roadmap.
Agreed.
So Jason, we are at the end. Do you have any final comments or words of wisdom to the audience today?
The only other thing which I meant to bring up earlier and let it slip my mind is really when you're looking at the technologies out there, make sure they're future enabled. So don't go buy a new piece of software and it's sitting on a flat file database. Make sure that it's got web enabled. You heard how some of the trends is around phones and watches. If the technology you're buying isn't building toward where the puck is going, as Wayne Gretzky said, instead of where it is now, then you're going to look up having spent a year implementing something and it's already going to be down the road. So really be intentional about knowing, like Sam said, you could definitely hire a consultant, but you also want to make sure you know enough. If you feel uncomfortable in it, dig in, learn, and understand sort of what the landscape is, because technology is going to impact your business, whether you want it to or not.
I could not agree with that more. So I'm going to properly launch the demo request at this point. So if anybody is interested in seeing what ProNovos has to offer you from a data analytics standpoint, we actually take your data and we put it directly into our software, which is pretty cool. I don't know a lot of people actually show you a demo with your actual data. So if you want to see how we can take your data and streamline it, we would be happy to show you. If anybody has any questions, I know we are over by a little bit, but I will check. You can put them in chat, Q&A, raise your hand. But Jason and I are happy to do a deeper dive if anybody has any questions over what we covered today. So we have sufficiently overwhelmed everybody because there are no questions. So I would like to thank you so much for all of your insights and knowledge. It was a pleasure doing this with you. And yeah, to anybody who has questions afterwards, feel free to reach out to Jason or I via LinkedIn, and we would be happy to answer any questions you might have. So thank you all for your time today.